G'day! Welcome to True Blue History. I'm Adam Bloom. Today's special guest is retired Australian Army Intelligence Major Kellie Dadds, and Kellie will be sharing her experiences as an intelligence officer during her 22-year career, which included deployments to Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and the Solomon Islands. Hi Kellie, thanks for joining us on the show.
Hi, Adam. Thanks very much. And I look forward to our chat today. And congratulations on the success of your podcast so far.
Thank you. I appreciate veterans like yourself agreeing to come on and just tell us about your experience. It's a privilege and an honor. So often people from families with a military connection also serve. Was that the case for you when you enlisted as a 17-year-old? And what sparked your interest in joining the Army? And what made you choose the Army over the Air Force and Navy?
Oh, sure, Adam. Yeah, look, I think like most Australian families, there is a connection somewhere along the line to either World War One and World War Two. And my grandfather on my paternal side, he was a sapper in World War Two and had served over in Papua New Guinea. However, his experience certainly wasn't my reasons for wanting to join the military. It really stemmed from looking for a way to serve the country in a way that I thought would suit who I was as a person, which is a fairly patriotic type of person. And having suffered from seasickness and air sickness, there was really only one choice for me, Adam, and that was the Australian Army. And so as a 17-year-old with three other friends from school, we all joined.
How long had you been in the Army before you became interested in the intelligence operations?
Sure, it didn't take very long, Adam. Whilst I was quite young when I first enlisted as a soldier, I guess I was a little bit naive in terms of what the Australian Army did, and I hadn't looked at it at that particular point in time as a long-term career. It was really just an experience, an opportunity to do something before I went on to a future career. So when I started to learn a bit more about what the Army did, certainly the job as an intelligence analyst sparked my interest. And so, yeah, it was only when I was 19 that I first applied to join Intelligence Corps. But at the same time, I also decided to apply for the Royal Military College. And as it turned out, I was accepted to both, but opted to go to the Royal Military College and hopefully succeed in becoming an intelligence officer, which I did.
So for you, can you give us a bit of a background of what Army intelligence involved? And for example, when was an Australian Intelligence Corps first formed and how has it evolved to its current day?
Sure. Look, I guess intelligence has been around for a long time, but in terms of Australian Army's history, it's only been around since 2000 and sorry about that, 1907. And the reason why I was saying 2007 is because I was in fact in Iraq when the centenary occurred, and I missed out on the celebration, the centenary of our Corps. So, yeah, basically what it's about, Adam, is when we fight, there's an enemy, and we need to know what the enemy is up to. And there are obvious opportunities to collect information from people or other forms of communication out there. And while that has changed drastically in a century, what we're trying to do is still collect the same information. And that is, we just want to know what the enemy's doing. Now, whether they pass that via an email or a normal conversation, then that's information that may be helpful to us as an Australian force or the Allied forces. And it protects our soldiers as well. And certainly that was a major focus on the role that I played during the many deployments that I served on throughout my career.
So without going into specific detail, what are some of the characteristics required in a candidate for the Intelligence Corps and how do they get assessed?
Look, it really comes down to having an analytical brain at the end of the day, Adam. It's you receive information, and what you need to be able to do is to piece the jigsaw together to try and figure out what the missing part is. So, as long as you have an analytical mind and an ability to be able to impart that information, be it verbally or in written form, in a succinct manner, then you will succeed in Corps. And commanders don't have a lot of time, particularly when they're in the heat of battle, to hear a 1 hour debrief on what an intelligence officer thinks going on in the battlefield. You really have to get to the point very quickly and give them what they need to know to be able to respond effectively.
So for you, being a female, did that pose any challenges when you're in the Corps, or was it a benefit?
Look, that's a difficult question to answer. Throughout my career in the Australian Army, and we need to acknowledge that a lot has changed since I first enlisted in 1996 to the current day. In the Corps, there was never an issue with being a female. I think in terms of the specialisation that I had, it was potentially another opportunity to exploit information, I guess, through gender, through being able to talk to various people. So in that sense, it was good. In terms of what it was like in the Army as a female, look, my experience was always very good. And in fact, in that entire 22 years, I can really only think of one particular point very early in my career where it was quite apparent that being a female was an issue to particular members, but I had the support of everyone around me, and they rallied, and we all got through it together. And I'm very grateful for what they did.
Absolutely. So during your service, you were deployed to Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and the Solomon Islands. What was your role for each of these deployments, and how were they different on each tour?
Yeah, look, they really varied throughout the 13 years that I deployed over those 8 deployments. They started off in the early days as a force protection officer, where I had a small team, and it was our job to track what was occurring, so that we could, at a tactical level, to keep our commanders informed. And it moved throughout the time, mainly focusing on a specialisation of intelligence, collecting information from human sources, I guess, is the easiest way to describe it. And that was a wonderfully challenging experience. A different culture involved.
Absolutely. So for you, Kelly, of all your deployments, which was the most challenging and why? And how did you manage these challenges and overcome them?
Each deployment had its own challenges. Each one was fantastic and challenging. But probably my last one was to Afghanistan was the best of all the deployments that I had, because at that point in my career, I was quite experienced. I deployed a number of times. So I was comfortable in a war environment, so to speak, and I was comfortable leading troops in a war environment. The challenge of that particular deployment was we were involved in a very serious line of work that had we not done our job as professionally as we did, could have resulted in strategic consequences. And so the team that I had during that particular deployment are lifelong friends. And it was just such a privilege to have worked with them.
So obviously we see with Army intelligence, and we see on movies, Kelly, that often movies portray intelligence as glamorous and mysterious spies and people that, dress in tuxedos, and it's not that at all, is it? It's nothing that is portrayed on what we see on television.
No, Adam, there's nothing that's fancy about sleeping under a piece of plastic and eating ration packs for months on end. Um, but I guess there is a strategic aspect to the James Bond type piece. But look, we're in the business of a tactical intelligence where we're trained to be in a war zone, and so there's nothing pretty about being in a war zone.
No, that's very true. And often, Kelly, the TV shows forget the human side of what when you're in a war zone.
True, Adam. I can't remember deploying with a ball gown, but who knows? One day, maybe.
Well, you never know, Kelly. You never know. So,
That's right.
intelligence gathering has been part of the military operations in one form of another since the beginning of warfare. How do you think the nature of intelligence and intelligence gathering has changed between World War One and World War Two and to the current day?
Oh, really, Adam, it's only the way that information is passed that has changed. At the end of the day, people still need to talk to each other and people need to know what they're up to. So be that on our side as the Australian Army, of course, out on the battleground, you need to let your commander know where you are, what you're doing. You might need to call for assistance, and the enemy do exactly the same thing. It really comes down to the manner in which people communicate that has changed.
So, would you say now, like obviously in World War One, there was the trench raids to identify the opposing units on the unit identifications, but in today's with intelligence, it's. Would you say technology is now the main thing that we look at to gather intel, or is it still going behind the lines and doing similar to what we did in World War One?
Look, there's a collection of different means of collecting information, and it's important to make sure that we keep all avenues open because who knows how they might be communicating. So, of course, there are people who are still trained to go behind enemy lines and do guerrilla warfare and covert type operations, and and they still talk to locals, and that's the way that they get information. But we also have some very technically trained people who are far more clever than me, who do a magnificent job in collecting information as well.
Absolutely. So I read in your bio that you were selected for Commando. You had the opportunity to go for Commando selection. Can you just tell us briefly about that process?
Yeah, sure, Adam. Look, I was really lucky when I was young. I was extremely fit, and as it turned out, after the Royal Military College, I was posted to one of the Special Forces units, and whilst I was there, I was invited to participate. By our commanding officer and then SOCOST Duncan Lewis, who is still around these days in the political sphere. And look, it was a wonderful opportunity that I guess at the time I really didn't appreciate just how fortunate I was to have that opportunity. It was tough, I'm a 65 kilo, 164 centimeter tall female, and carrying a lot of that stuff and keeping up. It was hard work. I won't say that it wasn't. And so like many who go through that process, we all trained really hard. We worked really hard, and it was a real privilege to be presented with the Green Beret at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And Kelly, I take my hat off to you. Absolutely. That's amazing. So well done. You for what you did. It's an inspiration to all females and all of us who could only dream of doing that.
Thanks, Adam.
So more recently, you left the army in 2018 after 22 years of service. What was your main reason to leave, and did you find transitioning from the service, from being in the defence force to civilian life difficult?
Sure, Adam. So I had an involuntary discharge, a medical discharge due to being diagnosed in 2015 with post-traumatic stress disorder. It honestly just caught me by surprise. It was like the blue screen of death is the only way that I can describe it, Adam, in my head, and just happened very quickly, and my condition deteriorated very quickly and resulted in a long time in hospital. But despite that horrible experience, and it wasn't just for me, it was for my family and for my work colleagues as well. The Army were brilliant. They did everything that they could to try and rehabilitate me and get me back into the workplace. I received the best of care. I had every opportunity to rehabilitate, but it did come to a point where it was evident that continuing to serve in the military was not in my interests and was not suitable for continued service in the Army. So that call was made, and look, it was a very sad time in my life to leave. I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed that I couldn't serve anymore, that I struggled to leave the house, that I was depressed, that I stuttered, all that sort of stuff that that people go through during those early days, and you just bury yourself away and just hope that it will go away. And with time and support, I'm fortunate to be in the position where I am now, with wonderful family support, and I'm functioning quite well these days, well, which is wonderful. But yeah, that transition was really tough, Adam, and I'd say even now, 3 years after, it's still difficult some days because I miss it so much, and I really loved my job, and I miss all the people that I worked with, and serving the country was a wonderful privilege, and it's very difficult to find something else that will match that.
I think, Kelly, you've got nothing to be ashamed of. You absolutely served your country with honor, and I've met you, and I can honestly say I'm very proud of what you've done, and I think for us as civilians, Kelly, all we can say is thank you for your service, because you when you enlisted, and every civilian should come up and say thank you to veterans like yourself, because when you enlisted, you signed your life on the dotted line. You virtually signed a blank check. And it's the like the honor that I have for you and other former servicemen and current serving defense members. I can't. All I can say is thank you for keeping our freedom and the way we live. Thank you for protecting us, because you guys are amazing. So, Kelly, you've got nothing to be ashamed of. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much for that, Adam. And yeah, it has taken quite some time to come to terms with I'll call it a predicament. It still feels like a predicament, and I really hope to come out on the positive side, and I can certainly see a light at the end of the tunnel. So thanks very much.
No, you're absolutely welcome. You're involved with many community organisations that serve the veteran community. In 2018, you founded the Veterans Initiative by the Left. What inspired you to create this organisation, and what is it about? And has your service as an intelligence officer assisted you with creating and managing this organisation?
So, By the Left, Adam, was a public awareness initiative that was aimed at broadening the public's perception of what a veteran looks like. And it also centered on focusing on the definition of a the definition of a veteran, which some people get confused these days. They really link it to warlike or return service, when the actual definition, as is defined in Australian legislation, it's about, whether you're male, female, whether you've served full-time, part-time, whether you've deployed or just done home service. you are all considered as an 80th veteran. And you highlighted that point before. It comes down to that commitment that you make to serve your country. And whether you receive the opportunity to deploy or not is really not a service member's choice. So what connects us is that service. And that is what defines veterans. And I really want to emphasise that point. So where it came about, Adam, was I attended a DVA forum in 2017, late 2017, which was focusing on DVA policy and legislation supporting service women and defence families. And I was staggered to see that when the question was asked in the forum how many service women that were in attendance had ever been questioned or challenged about their medals, that nearly everyone in the room raised their hands. And that really took me back, because I was still in service at that particular time, and it was not an issue that I was familiar with at all. And so in conversation with all of these ladies, some of the stories were absolutely shocking, how they had been treated. And it all came down to wearing their medals on the left. Because, as you know, if you wear your defence medals on the left, then that means that they're yours, because you wear them over your heart. And someone from who is a family member, they would wear them on the right to distinguish between those who have served and those who haven't. So it really took me back, Adam, listening to the heartache in some of their stories, to the point where someone had burned their medals, others refused to ever march or wear them again. And to me, that wasn't right. And that's not who we are as veterans or as Australians. And we needed to come up with a way to address it. What I quickly came to learn was it wasn't just an issue that was being experienced by current or ex-serving women. It was also something that was being experienced by young men. So, a lot of these young guys these days, that they may have only been in for 4, 5, 6 years, but they've deployed 2 or 3 times to different theatres. So, some of these guys, that they'll be wearing 6 or 7 medals, and, they'll only be 22 or 23. And so they'll have someone walk up to them and say, "Hey, young fella, you got your medals on the wrong side there, Tiger. You better put them on the right." And some of those guys don't take to that sort of comment particularly well and can be quite offended by it. So that's why we developed By the Left, to broaden the public's perception of what a veteran looks like, because we all look different. We're all different ages. We're not all the old fellas that proudly march down the street on Anzac Day with their medals clanging. We're a mix of everyone these days. So I guess the final part of your question was, did my role as an intelligence officer help me? Not really. I wish that I could say yes, but I really threw myself in the deep end, Adam, and launched it on social media. And it was largely received particularly well, but other aspects weren't. And the piece that wasn't was that some people believed it to be a gender issue and read it completely as a gender issue, when it wasn't. It was never about gender. The fact that service women were being questioned about their medals wasn't their fault. It was the way that they were being perceived. And so we wanted to influence that, and had some wonderful people that came forward and helped. And it just grew so big, all of a sudden, the service women were invited to lead marches in Melbourne and Sydney and all these other places, the Gold Coast, and all over the country. And service women and men who had never marched before, particularly those who had not deployed, came out in their thousands and marched that particular year. So it was a real privilege and to be involved with, and I met some wonderful people along the way. But, I had a young baby at the time, who was my third child, and I had a 3 and 1 year old, and a husband that worked in the military who was never home. It probably wasn't the wisest project that I've ever launched into. But I'm so glad that I did, because for some people, it really made a difference.
Absolutely, and I think that's what it's all about, Kelly, is that we do, and unfortunately, it's a shame that it does happen with the younger veterans today, that they're not seen as our forefathers are, that it's old men marching down streets, and I can see why it would be offensive to say, "Hey, mate, put those, that's not their relatives' medals. They should be on the other side." And it's a shame, but I think what By the Left does, it's educating people on, well, okay, that's what those. He looks like a veteran there. She's a veteran. And we now know, okay, By the Left, okay, so if they wear their medals on their left, they obviously have served. If they're on the right, they're a relatives medals. So I think it's a fantastic campaign, and I really think it's, if anything, Australia can be educated through By the Left. So well done.
Thanks, mate. Yep, I really appreciate it.
In hindsight, as you look back on your career, if you had to pick one memorable experience that stood out, what was it, and why?
That's a really tough question. But if I was to say anything, it would be the friendships, the mateship that I developed with so many fantastic Australians throughout that 22 years. I mean, these are people that we see each other at our best, and we see each other at our worst. When you're laying in a plywood hut and rockets are coming in, and you're praying that that this plywood hut is going to defend you from this rocket, and you just all look at each other and you laugh, because what else can you do? These people are so special to me, and so that's been the best experience of my military career.
Absolutely. And I guess it's, for you, Kelly, it's a bond that will never be broken, because you've faced life and death situations together, and it only makes you stronger.
Yeah, of course it does. Yeah, all the experiences, good and bad, have shaped me into the person that I am these days. That's for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what advice would you give, Kelly, to any young person who is thinking about joining the Defence Forces today? What advice would you give to them?
Look, I think the most important thing, Adam, is that you need to understand what it is that you're signing up to do. You are signing voluntarily at the government's instruction, to deploy into a war zone to defend Australia and its interests. So as long as those people who are looking at a career are happy and willing to do that, then the career's for you. Get out there. There's so many great opportunities, so many careers in all the three services these days. I really would encourage anyone who wants to serve the nation to sign up and serve today.
Absolutely. So, and I also read that you are involved in a project called Brothers in Arms. And can you tell us exactly what that project is and why it's so special to you?
Adam, I would love to tell you about this story, because it's a story that you might be familiar with. In fact, it's the remarkable story of the Zonnebek Five, and it all started in Belgium in 2006 in a little place called Zonnebek, which you would know, Adam, is very close to the Menin Gate in Belgium there, and it was the scene of unprecedented fighting, both in terms of its extent and the slaughter during World War One. The cost was insurmountable, with an estimated 4 million dying just in that particular area. And for Australia, as I recall, I think there were about 46,000 that perished on the Western Front, which was a huge percentage when you think, we had 62,000 that died in World War One, and for 46,000 of them to die in this small patch of our Earth is quite staggering. So, look, what happened in 2006 was there was a machine operator named Tom Heyman, and he was laying new lines along a road up there when he suddenly discovered whilst he was digging, what appeared to be human remains. And having knowledge of the area's military history, as all locals in that particular area do, Tom decided that he'd call a local amateur archaeologist by the name of Johan van der Waal. Have you met Johan at all, Adam?
I have actually, and I've been to his cafe just outside Polygon Wood, and I've been in his private museum, and yeah, he's a lovely man, absolutely lovely. So I'll let you continue and tell the story, Kelly.
Yeah, sure, mate. Well, look, when Johan went down there and had a look, all that he could confirm was that they were remains of a World War One soldier. And after they received all the approvals, what they did was they cleared the first grave, and then they noticed another just next to the first one, and then another and another and another. And in total, there were 5 Australian soldiers that were excavated. And the last Australian body, however, it made an everlasting impression on Johan, and it was evident that someone had taken great care in laying him down to rest. And the 5th body was later identified as Australian Private John Hunter from Nanango in Queensland. And research led to the family in Australia, and they confirmed that the story in the family was that John, or Jack as he was known in the family, had been buried by his younger brother Jim. And Jim's careful burial had in fact preserved his brother, and the body was able to be identified almost 100 years later. Now, the real tragedy, and get your tissues to this story, I know there's so many from World War One, but this one really strikes a chord, was that Jack, the one who had died, had actually only enlisted to protect his younger brother Jim, who was insistent on volunteering to fight, and they both ended up in the 49th Battalion. So on that fateful day in late September 1917, I'm testing my memory here, the Battle of Polygon Wood, 25th, 26th or something like that, Adam?
Yep.
Well, look, it had just commenced, and unfortunately, Jack had received an order to go over the top to retrieve a piece of tin that was reflecting in the troops' eyes, and which meant that they couldn't target the enemy. So it was during that retrieval that Jack was badly injured by an enemy mortar shell. And despite severe injuries, courageously, he managed to crawl back to the trench not far from where Jim was standing. And with the help of another soldier, Jim carried his brother on a stretcher for over 1 kilometre to the nearest dressing station. And tragically, Jack, along with many others, did not survive that particular day. So the story goes that Jim took great care burying his brother, and Johan, of course, found him like this, but Jim had told his family that, he crossed both of Jack's hands across his heart, and he'd wrapped him in a thick rubber ground sheet and then secured it with signal wire. And Jim had promised Jack that he'd return to give him the burial that he deserved. And as promised, at war's end in 1919, Jim did return to find Jack, but the landscape looked nothing like it had appeared in September 1917. And with a few Australian mates, they dug in a few spots near the landmark bend in the road that he had taken note of. And he just expected to hit the telltale piece of rubber sheeting. But what Jim did not know is that the road in front of him had actually just been resealed, and the road had been moved and was probably running over his brother's body. And, it's possible that Jim walked across Jack on that particular day. And And so it was that Jack and the others were not discovered until 2006, and the 5 of them, of which 3 have now been identified through DNA testing, they were buried with full military honours at Polygon Wood in 2007. So, as you can only imagine, Adam, the discovery of Jack Hunter's body had a profound effect on Johan, and you have heard it from his own mouth, when he tells the story of that day, how he recalls how he promised to follow up on the story of that soldier. And later on, he visualised a memorial to recognise the impact of the First World War on families, and part of that vision has now been realised with the construction of the memorial park, and the remainder is in progress, which brings us to where we are with this project today.
It's a fascinating story, Kelly. I've been lucky enough to stand at Jack's grave, and it's a very powerful. After hearing the story from Johan, and actually, I've been lucky enough that I've been to the Western Front 3 times, and the first time I stood at his grave, and every time since I've been back, I've been at his grave, and I've paid my respects to him, and I'm almost crying talking to you, Kelly, because it's so powerful, and it's an amazing honor to. It's my favorite cemetery. I know that's not the right word to say about it. It's just the Polygon Wood Cemetery it's got special significance because it's actually where the 5th Division Memorial is up on top of the old Buffs Mount, where they used to, before the war, that used to be where the Belgian army they used to shoot and practice targets, and that's where the 5th Division Memorial is. And it's a very special cemetery, and it's my favorite cemetery. And that story is why I got into military history. And it's stories like that you can't help. And Kelly, you've been there yourself. You've walked that ground. It's so special. And it's one thing to read it in a book. It's another thing to actually walk that ground. And the cemeteries, they are silent cities. They are, and you really can sense the pain of the 46,000 AIF men that paid the ultimate sacrifice. And it's so special.
Yeah, it is, Adam. It's sacred ground, and hearing this story the first time, I've read a lot of military history and a lot of military stories, but there was just something about this one that really just hit home. And often it's really difficult to put your shoes in, to put yourself in the shoes of Australian families. Me being a service member, just to know how hard that must have been, and this story really drilled that home for me.
Absolutely. And I think it's when you read the headstones, Kelly, of only son of Mr. and Mrs. Smith from Bendigo in Victoria, and the stories like that, it makes you stop and think how lucky we are to live in a country that we live in, with the freedoms we have. And the story, how I like to remember when I walk in the cemeteries, is it stories like that where you read only son, and with that, when his life ended, with we never know what he could have gone on to achieve, whether he had children, what he could have done with his life, and it really just shows you the true scale and sacrifice of the war. And it's so emotional and so touching.
Yeah, can you imagine if you were the family that received the telegram telling you that your child had died, or your husband or your wife, and then later on, how many characters was it in the epitaph? Something like in 63 characters was all that they had to write about the life of this particular individual. How do you do that? That's just unbelievable.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's just there's no Kelly, there's no words to really describe it. It's just yeah, it's just a very moving experience, and it's for both of us. It's been an absolute privilege and an honour to walk in these men's footsteps. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's why I was so drawn to this particular project, and looking at what the Australian aspect of it is trying to do, and it's really focused on the construction of the bronze sculpture of the Hunter brothers, which, for those who have seen it, it's been sculpted by Lewis Lohman in Melbourne. He's the same artist that sculpted the Boer War Memorial on Anzac Parade in Canberra. He's a brilliant artist, and what he's putting together at the moment to be transported over to Belgium is just breathtaking. And so, the Australian side of it, what we're trying to do is to get that up and running. The sculpture is almost complete. We need to do some serious fundraising to transport it over to Belgium, and we're getting onto that, although COVID has made life difficult for everyone at the moment. And look, the other aspect of what we're doing is there's a small team of researchers, and what we're doing is developing a register containing the names of all Australian families who lost 2 or more immediate family members as a result of World War I. And at the moment, we're only focusing on World War I because all the World War II service histories have not been uploaded onto National Archives yet. So that makes it really difficult for the amateur historian to be able to access all those files from home at the moment. So that's why we're focusing on World War I, and maybe in the future we might go to World War II. But for the past 12 months, our small team of volunteers, and I'd like to acknowledge Gary and Bill here, who have really been instrumental and have dedicated so much of their time in this research. But so far we've identified over 4,000 names, representing over 2,000 Australian families. And at this point, we think we're about 2/3 of the way into our research. And there are some staggering statistics, Adam, that are emerging, including over 90 pairs of brothers that were killed on the same day, over 110 families who lost 3 or more immediate family members, not to mention the number of father and sons and brothers and sister losses that have been identified as well. So, yeah, it really has been a very humbling experience to sit there for many hours researching these service records to identify those Australian families that were part of the tragedy that was World War I.
Yeah, just such a. I'm sitting here just hearing some of those numbers, Kelly, and it's just more than 90, and it's just on the same day, and it's just that's why I love history. It's the personal stories. This is why I love World War One history, and these personal stories. They need to be told, and what Brothers in Arms is doing, it's you and the team, Kelly. It's amazing, and all I can say is thank you for the work that you guys are doing.
Oh, mate, honestly, it really is a privilege. And with this data, all we hope to do is to give it to people who in the future can use it to investigate further, because we haven't measured the true extent of the impact, and there is no way that we can possibly do it at the moment because we don't have the raw data to be able to do that. And so I really hope that this register helps future generations to develop an understanding of that tragedy that was World War One.
For future generations, it's going to be amazing. So well done to you and your team. I think it's special work that you guys are doing, and all credit should go to you and your team.
Great. Thanks very much, Adam.
It's such an emotional topic, and you can't help but you can't help but almost cry. It's just these personal stories. It's just one of those things that's what the cost was. It was just a very bloody war, just a very, very bloody war.
Yeah, they are. They're very moving, Adam, and we've taken the time to put together some of those stories as well. And for those who are interested, then you can check our Facebook page, which is just called Brothers in Arms Memorial Project Australia, and perhaps Adam might be able to put a link in the notes and follow through, and you really will read some quite remarkable stories.
I will do that, Kelly. And is there a way that the listeners can donate to help get the statue over to Belgium, or have you?
Yeah, look, there is. There's a link through the website. But what we're also putting together at the moment is mainly for the families. In all honesty, we're getting some miniature statues made of the bronze sculpture, because there will be many families who simply cannot make the journey over to Belgium to see the real thing and to pay their respects. But what we would like to do is to provide them with an opportunity to have a small keepsake that they can keep in the house. And so hopefully in the near future, they'll be available for people to purchase, and certainly all of the profit from that purchase will go to transporting the actual bronze sculpture over to Belgium.
So with COVID, Kelly, when is the actual when was the actual pre-COVID? When was the actual unveiling supposed to actually occur?
It was meant to be Remembrance Day last year, Adam, and at this point, as you know, Europe is not in a good position with the outbreak of COVID at the moment, and so to be honest, I cannot see the Memorial Park being officially opened this year. But what is exciting is that the bronze sculpture is still continuing, and in fact, Lewis will do the pouring in March at his studio here in Melbourne, and we'll do our best to make sure that we can capture a video of that and to get it out to people who are interested to have a look at, because it's quite fascinating.
Oh, very special. It's a very special project to be involved in, and it's just it's so special. And as I said, I can't thank you and the team enough. You have been fantastic. So well done.
Cheers, thanks.
So just to finish up, Kelly, where do you see Anzac Day and Remembrance Day going in the future?
I really don't see it changing a great deal. There's the traditional side now that has been forged largely in terms of the way that we pay respects to those who have made the ultimate sacrifice and those who came back injured or who served. So I think from that ceremonial side, it won't change a great deal in the near future. What happens in 200 years or so, who knows? But I think the most important thing is, from an Australian history and the education piece, is that the stories continue to be shared with future generations so that they can develop that understanding of how terrible and tragic war is at the end of the day. And if there's a diplomatic means to prevent people having to fight, then we should do everything that we possibly can to pursue that avenue. Because if we don't, what ends up happening is that lots of fabulous people die in the service of their countries, trying to protect us, basically.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself, and I agree 100%. I think I think sometimes, Kelly, we're too quick to go to war and then actually stop and think maybe there is another way, and a peaceful way, that we can resolve the issues that we have in this world.
Yeah, war unfortunately serves a purpose, Adam. But yeah, we certainly need to pursue every possible means to prevent it and to make sure that the world remains a peaceful place, because, gee, we need it at the moment when we're struggling with a pandemic.
Absolutely, it's I couldn't agree more. It's it's definitely you've hit. Yeah, absolutely. The pandemic is just it's one of the things that we're facing at the moment that is just doesn't look like it's going to end. It will eventually, but at this stage, we just got to keep going day by day, one foot in front of the other. That's all we can do.
We do. The funny aspect from a veteran perspective, and certainly this has been spoken about by my mates as well, is that we actually haven't minded the lockdown because so many of us have spent so much time overseas, either stuck in a base or stuck in a ship or something like that. Being stuck in your home when you've got all the conveniences of your house and Netflix and communication and everything, for many of us, it's actually been okay. I think the greatest challenge has been transitioning from parent to teacher for many of us, and yeah. So most military people, from what I can gather, are actually handling the lockdown pretty well at the moment.
Absolutely, and I think Kelly, it's a great way to end the podcast and sharing your amazing story and your 22 years as a Army intelligence officer, and all I can say, Kelly, is thank you very much for your service, and everyone appreciates what you did for us. So thank you again.
And thanks for giving a voice to our stories as well, Adam. That's great.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review for the podcast.